Both close-ups and audio for the power.
The power.
The power.
You know what I'm going to say?
What?
Unlimited power.
I feel like you did not commit to that.
I didn't want to clip the mic over that, you know.
That was the quietest Palpatine impression.
Unlimited
Power! I'm always thinking about Palpatine a little bit, and so yeah, when I saw this title, I thought of power.
Power, and how it can be unlimited. Yes. Maybe a little known fact, but would you say he's your favorite Star Wars character?
I mean, I think he's yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not really, but yeah. But actually,
not really. But
I mean,
actually,
you have to admire him. The level of planning that man is capable of. He's a planner, and really, the entire thing is the story of how his plans got thwarted.
Yeah, I mean, for Elle, it's kind of a tragedy, really.
It's a tragedy.
You know,
yeah.
9 film, amazing plans falling through, thanks to these meddling Skywalkers.
Yeah, exactly. But this is not Palpatine's story.
No.
This is, well, by the way, I'm Elle Cordova.
Oh, and I'm Grace Yost.
And this is Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club. Thanks again for joining us. So this month we're reading The Power by Naomi Alderman. And I do think we should do a quick content warning.
Yeah, so, you know, of course, this book deals very explicitly with sexual violence, sexual assault. We're not planning on reading any of those accounts, but that was going to be kind of a through line in some of this conversation. The idea of sexual violence will come up a few times, because that's an important part of what Naomi Alderman is asking us to think about. It's part of the project. So we just wanted to mention that off the top in case that's of concern.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is Naomi Alderman is laying out some specific views about gender in this novel that I don't necessarily always agree with, but I think in terms of her thought experiment, I can see why there are some like monolithic ideas about men and women and gender. And even though maybe my own ideas about gender are a little bit more complicated or just a little different from hers, we're going to play in her sandbox for this discussion. We're going to use the kind of ideas about men and women that she's proposing here, just for the sake of the discussion and for this thought experiment to work. I think sometimes you don't want to introduce too many complicated variables, otherwise the experiment falls apart. So I can see why she has some monolithic ideas, and we're gonna roll with those for the discussion.
Right, and she has some blurriness in there too, which we can talk about as well. But
she does.
But there are, I think it's fair to say, some generalizations about gender that we just want to flag as generalizations.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Right.
So to jump into the discussion, like I said, I think this is kind of a thought experiment. Naomi Alderman is asking what would happen if women were more powerful than men. If sort of almost overnight, women gained a special power that enabled them to be the dominant gender. And the way she does that is she imagines what I think she calls a skein.
Skein, yeah.
I looked it up. I thought it was skein, but it turns out it's actually a real term.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's like a rolled up ball of yarn on a reel or something.
That's kind of what I was picturing, kind of like it's like here in the collarbone area.
Like an organ, which is, I guess, dormant. A certain age group of young women, like, you know, early teens, are the first to discover how to use it. They find that they have an ability to sort of cause electric shock. And they kind of are able to wake it up in older women. People have various amounts of it. Some women have it stronger than others. And so she sort of tells the tale through multiple perspectives, different characters, over like a 10-year period. And she's actually doing it through a framing device of it's a male author writing this story 5,000 years after the events of the novel. And it's a sort of a historical fiction piece that he's come up with, and he's corresponding with a celebrated woman author named Naomi. So we'll talk about the framing device in a bit and what that does for the story. But basically, that's sort of the general premise, I would say.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I think the action of the book, I think this is from 2016, the novel. takes place, the bulk of the book is taking place basically in our historical moment, and then the framing is like looking back and seeing, by the time people are living in the era of the frame, things have already it's already been cemented as like women are the dominant force, and then this is sort of an explanation in universe how that came to be, kind of taking us from our time into a very radically different future over the course of 10 years.
Right.
The novel takes place. Yeah, so we have this interesting frame, and then most of this is told, we're rooted in, and I would say there are like 4 main characters that we're really exploring, who are each kind of showing us a different corners of how suddenly this sudden shift in power, how will affect things like religion, and how will affect things like government, journalism. So yeah, we've got, would you say Elle, Roxy, Tundi, and Margot are our main characters?
Yep. And then we kind of get into the head of like Jocelyn a bit.
Yeah,
who's Margot's daughter, and then Daryl, Roxy's brother, a little bit toward the end. But yeah, 4 main characters.
Right. So we're kind of tracing what happens to these characters, and the women. Tundi is probably the male character that we spend the most time with. He's a journalist. He's sort of seeing what's happening. He's the person who captures a lot of the initial liberatory elements of this, where women in various countries who have been facing oppression are sort of taking back their power. There's a sort of more optimistic moment in the beginning of the novel where women who had been like oppressed in various ways are demonstrating, they're marching, they're defending themselves. It's sort of very satisfying to see, I think, for and so he's kind of documenting that. We also have the character of Elle, who is foster child, right? And she's been undergoing some really horrific abuse, and her journey starts with her killing her abuser, which I think it's also this beginning part of the novel where it's like power is being used in more of a self-defense way, and so she kills her abuser, and then she becomes this like quasi-religious figure. That was interesting to me.
Yeah, and we'll talk more deeply about that.
Yeah.
About the religion in this novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have Roxy, who is the illegitimate daughter of a gangster who's always been kind of pushed to the side. So we have a lot of these characters who are, a lot of the women in our 4 main characters are people who have been kind of pushed to the side in various ways. And she's sort of, not really part of the family because she's the illegitimate daughter. Her half-siblings are all boys, and her father is more invested in them. And but then she becomes the most powerful. I think it's safe to say she has the most power, and that changes the dynamics of her family in kind of complicated ways. And then we have Margot, who is a middle-aged politician in the U.S. We see her as a mayor. We see the various ways very familiar to us that women are in politics are treated differently from men. She endures some microaggressions, things like that, and then she's on her own trajectory. She is one of also has this ability, this power sort of woken up in her as well.
Eventually she becomes a senator and rises in the ranks to the point where she has the president's ear. Right.
And she also is part of the let's train these women.
She sets up that whole military project.
Right.
Yeah.
And something that is like a little bit, so we were talking about the optimistic beginning of the novel, and one of the things that is like maybe polarizing about this novel, it's a sort of thought-provoking novel, is that many of the characters that we're following as they gain power, it sort of seems to be this corrosive, corrupting force in their lives.
Yeah.
So we have, Elle, the religious leader, who kind of gets embroiled in this country where she ends up involved in like assassinating the leader of that country, right? That Tatiana, right? So she becomes, you think like initially she's going to be this really positive religious character, and she kind of gets enmeshed in politics in a negative way. Roxy ends up losing her power. Her father and brother take her organ. It's really
Skein, yeah.
hard passage to read. Very
well,
gory.
there's a lot of hard passages to read
Right.
in this book.
Right. And then so she sort of ends up in a more, she's like less, like she loses that power, and then she's kind of on a more positive journey. And then Margot becomes like very corrupt.
Very corrupt, yeah.
And then willing to kind of, you know, she becomes kind of like sexist against men in the course of this book. Like she ends up sort of, ends up sort of acting the way that other in ways that we associate in our current world with the way that some male politicians act with women. She ends up acting that way, and it's a way, I think, of showing the power flipping. So yeah, that's kind of a tricky thing. So we go from a more liberatory opening part of the book to an exploration of the various ways that power corrupts. And there doesn't seem to be in the novel, there isn't really a positive depiction of somebody who gains this type of power.
The only positive depiction we really have is Tundi.
Right, but he doesn't have power.
He's the point of entry, and I wonder how much of that is the frame, you know, because it's written from the perspective of a male author 5,000 years after these events. So it would make sense that his main POV, his point of entry, would be through the eyes of this like well-meaning male journalist, you know.
Right.
But when you zoom out and you realize, okay, this is what is Naomi Alderman as the actual author saying with this, it becomes more complicated to make really the only sympathetic character be the man, you know, in this situation.
And maybe partially Roxy, after she loses her power, she kind of ends up pushed a little to the side in the story, I guess. Yeah. But she's not really a moral center in this story. You know, I think it's fair to say and Tundi is.
Yeah, I would say he is. You know, she's doing some really interesting things with, just sort of flipping the patriarchy on its head and showing that actually if women had the same amount of physical power that men have, or actually more, that this would be an equally corrupting force, and it would happen immediately overnight. And I think you and I both have some thoughts about that, which we'll get into. But I wanted to let's talk first about the religion aspect.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, one through line here is the idea of, you know, the voice in Allie's head. And it turns out that then it ends up talking to Margot too at the end. We can talk about that. But yeah, so Allie, the foster care kid, who ends up killing her abuser and then starting this religion, she finds herself in a convent, taking sort of refuge there, being brought in along with a few others girls by these nuns, and then eventually they oust the nuns and she starts her new religion. She's basically, from the beginning of the story, we see that she's being talked to by a voice, and it's kind of unclear through the entire story, like, who is this voice? We get the impression it's a feminine voice. It's a motherly voice. It's calling her like honey bun and sweet pea, and it's a little confusing because in the beginning of the story it has a very biblical voice, and then it kind of throughout the story ends up kind of seeming more and more familiar and like more like a modern mom and less like a biblical God. But I think, you know, we're meant to wonder who the voice is through the whole thing. Is it just her alter ego? Is it her talking to herself? Is it God? Is it somehow actually God? Is it maybe like a mother figure that she's creating for herself that she never had in real life? Like, I think by the end we see that it probably is supposed to be God.
That's kind of what I was thinking too.
Or the serpent, you know? Or possibly both.
Right.
Like at different times, it's both sort of vying for attention. And the only reason I say both is because when it finally vanishes, when she finally kind of casts it out and she says, well, it's been nice working with you. She literally says that. The next line is something like, and then the voices, she never heard the voices again. It was like plural.
Right.
So I wondered maybe if it's the serpent and the Lord or whatever speaking to her. But anyway, she sets up a religion that's basically, for lack of a better word, a slight tweaking of Christianity as it exists now. So instead of Jesus, we have Jesus as the central figure. We have Mary, the Mother Mary, as the sort of central figure of her religion. God is a feminine is sort of feminized and reimagined as a feminine force. And the way she kind of describes it as is that there was this happened before with the Old Testament. God sort of got tired of the way things were. He spoke to Jesus, started a new power structure or new regime, and then now it's happening again. God is tired of the way things were. She is setting up a new power structure.
Right. I think supporting that is the fact that, when later, right before, as you were just mentioning, the voice leaves Allie's head, we get this reference. At the very beginning of the book, we have an excerpt from the book of Samuel about people wanting a king, hierarchies like that. And then there's an allusion to that. So I think we're invited to think of the voice as God, or at least that's one possible identity for it. Like you were saying, it's a little bit unclear. It could be various things. Yeah. It's interesting to me because, of course, the Christianity, and here I think the version of it we see most clearly is Catholicism, because we have the nuns. Like historically, for hundreds of years, the way that women have gained any sort of power in religion is like in these communities where they're living with other women, and often women who have like some kind of ability to see, or that can be a source of power. There's a really famous medieval composer, Hildegard of Bingen, who had this sort of ability, like the sight, and then that gave her some sort of power. So I was interested to see that pattern that I've seen in history come into this book. And then it also another way to highlight, to gain sort of power, so kind of reread the Bible through a feminist lens, to center on like the women in the Bible, and to see God. You can see God as a kind of, we tend to gender God as masculine but of course there are a lot of people, Christian and not Christian, who see God as maybe it's a more of a non-binary figure. There is a feminine side to God, and so that seems to be what the novel is exploring. It was like a little bit personally sad to me that this didn't lead to like a beautiful new religion that was less oppressive, at least, but instead this is just another arena for power to corrupt. Mm-hmm. So they end up doing kind of their finances are kind of shady, and then there's Allie has the ability to heal some ailments, at least for a limited amount of time, and they're like carefully vetting people for her to heal. So that was just,
she's a little bit of a fraud.
She's a little bit of a fraud, and that was a little bit of a bummer for me, to be honest.
Well, but yeah. I mean, I think that's realistic. Like you would have to think. And then she said something about like, how many miracles does it take?
Right.
Not very many. As long as we can convince people that we've done a few miracles, that people will believe anything, and that rings true to me.
Right. And she does genuinely really good work with like trying to get, there's like a woman who's been beaten at the beginning of the novel that she makes sure she has medical assistance. It's just sort of, I think part of, which we'll get to later, part of the thesis of this novel is that power is this very corrupting force,
right,
that is inherently corrupting. And then we just see this happening with religion.
Mm-hmm. I did like this idea that you would have different gradations of this electric power, and that she was clearly the like ultimate wielder of this. She had Roxy has the most force, but then Allie has this deft ability to go in and actually make people do her will with tweaking little like neuronal synapses and changing people's actual thoughts, which she kind of realizes looking at the eels and learning that they can do this and making their prey go into their jaws. And that's an interesting idea, that you would have somebody who can actually use this power to control people.
We don't really get a viewpoint on this, but the country of Moldova ends up getting run by a woman, Tatiana, and then Allie very memorably uses her power to get Tatiana to just like to kill herself, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and that is a very like that country is where we see the really the worst version of women gaining power in the context of this novel, where it becomes like really abusive and men's rights are being taken away.
And it makes sense that Alderman would set that conflict there, because this is a country that is known, or an area of the world that is known for human trafficking, and there's been a lot of violence against women in that area. So if you're going to have a strong backlash and uprising, likely it would be a place like this.
That's where we're like firmly in the last part of the novel, where we really see, like we've been talking about, the really corrosive nature of power.
Mm-hmm. I think what really struck me, and maybe where I found myself just wanting immediately to not believe the story, is just how quickly all of this happens.
Right.
So we've basically got, in a period of 10 years, and she's counting down to the big cataclysm, the big global war that brings everything back down to the Stone Age, to which then from there we imagine that women start up a new system of power in society, but that all of this would happen in 10 years, and that really within even a couple years we have suddenly just this mass, like, pillaging and, bands going around committing really grievous acts of violence, and, sexual violence and murder, and, against men specifically, but then also even other women and children. It just seems so quick for all of this to happen. And that is where I found myself just sort of wondering why would that, I'm not sure I agree with that.
Right. I think like the case that Alderman is making here is that, okay, change in the gender that is typically more physically dominant, that will immediately change all these behaviors, seems, because I think that there would be a lot more inertia from all of the hundreds of years of cultural expectations. We have people like Margot, who's lived for decades in one role, and I think I don't know if I would think that she would sort of change into this other version of herself, even over a few years.
Certainly some individual people
Right.
would maybe use this power this way immediately.
Right.
But I just think maybe in general, in order for these giant changes to happen, I feel like we would need more time. Like the story is, the frame is set 5,000 years in the future. Maybe if we saw then, now we've got a society set up where women are cruel on this massive scale or something, then I could see it. I think if we're talking about within the course of the lifetime of one individual who was socialized as a woman, and then suddenly acting this way, I just think it's maybe a harder pill to swallow.
I think if you were born after that change and you grew up in a world where this is already accepted, this is what it is,
and you're being socialized in this way,
right?
Yeah.
But even then, I think it would take several generations. Like right now in our current world, for many of us, at least living in this country, having like more physical strength is pretty irrelevant to most of our jobs. And we're not running around trying to like hunt animals. We're not like gathering berries. And yet that is one part of the story as to why we are in a sexist system now. It's one part. It's a very complicated story, but we still live in the wake of that, right? So I think it would just take a little bit longer, So there's a minor disagreement, I guess there. But it's an interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I can see also that there would be a rewiring of one's brain. Like, it reminds me of that scene where Margot says something like when she knows that she could just kill Daniel, she's like, I would never do it, but just knowing that I could changes everything. I
think, yeah, and where I'm very with Alderman here is that like I think like the sheer vulnerability, just speaking very generally, of like living as a woman in this country, or in, of course, I know this country, my own life the best, but there are things that you won't do, Yeah,
you're not going to walk out alone in the middle of the night, right, down a street, in the city.
Yeah, lots of fears that people that one would have, and then I do think I think that this book really makes me think, like, if you knew you had this this amazing ability to defend yourself, that it would really change you, that you would have this kind of this confidence that, okay, I'm way less vulnerable to physical harm than I was before. I do think that would transform you. I don't know if it would lead to like the pillaging and levels of sexual violence within a few short years, but it certainly would change, maybe alter a lot of our personalities, perhaps.
And to be fair, we're not living under an oppressive regime. Right. Well, in some ways, but not in this overt way that like people in certain areas of the world now are. So I imagine it'd be different in those areas of the world.
Of course.
Which is kind of her argument. It's like, there's a reason she said it in Moldova, like, or that the Besapara or whatever the country is.
That it becomes.
Yeah. That it's over there and it's in that space.
And actually, and that's a good point, because I think in the United States, because we see that through Margot and Jocelyn, it's like not like things have shifted, but there's not like a crazy regime. There's a little bit more, it's more stable, more continuity. It's just that people's roles are changing. So it doesn't appear, at least, that there's as much of that going on in the United States.
I think this novel, the story of this novel feels a little bit more extreme because we spend so much time really looking at that one area with the country that they've sort of set up.
Yeah.
I think if it were a more bird's eye view of like what's happening in the US, what's happening in the Western Europe, I think maybe it would seem less extreme. I think we were looking at one specific extremist regime,
right? Really honing in, really zooming in.
But then we are asked to believe that that within those 10 years there's a global cataclysm. So and that everything's reduced to rubble basically in the Stone Age. So yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's like, again, the way that any thought experiment would be, you'd have to kind of reduce it to certain variables and be bold with it and explore what would happen if these very bold changes were made. Again, it makes me wrestle with my ideas about what is power, what is gender. I'm not sure I agree with Alderman's thesis here exactly, but it's certainly a provocative question.
Right, and I think where I do really agree is what I consider the novel's political project to be, because as you were just saying, it is a thought experiment, and I think by flipping these power dynamics, Alderman renders the type of violence that is unfortunately very familiar to us in our world, violence stemming from patriarchal systems of oppression, sexual violence. She renders those actions strange through this flipping of the genders in terms of power. And I think in doing that, she's shining a light on, like, look at these things, and see them with fresh eyes and see it in a different way. I think that's one of the projects of this novel, and I'm very in support of that. But then there's, I think the idea of, it seems to me that what this book is arguing is that basically all of the differences between, just generally speaking, men and women come from a difference in the ability in like physical dominance. Mm-hmm. By changing that power comes from physical dominance, and there's only one expression of power, and it's corruption. It will lead to corruption inevitably, and that once it's women with this power, then they begin to adopt behaviors and that we associate with men in our current world, but they then start taking them. So it's like
it's a one-to-one relationship, really.
Right, that power and gendered behavior and physical dominance is all like one thing, and it all leads to the same place. Mm-hmm. And now, so it's sort of an interesting idea of gender where like basically there are no real differences between men and women. It's simply who has the power, the upper hand in a physical confrontation. Yeah,
and whether we believe that or not is kind of irrelevant. This is the story she has set out for us. What I think is really interesting, one of the things she does in the frame that I thought really struck me was she has Naomi's character, who is this sort of patronizing, I guess matronizing in that society. She'd be like matronizing, but this really patronizing tone of like, well, this is a work of men's literature. But the thing that she said, she finds it hard to believe that there was ever a time when there would be like male warriors. And I think there was some line in there about like women, of course, women are going to naturally be more violent as we are the ones that rear the children.
Right.
Like she's using this bodily, this natural, like argument. Like, of course, it's just like the natural way that it must have always been. Since we're the ones rearing the children, we have things to protect. We are naturally more violent, and it's interesting to hear that be turned, see that be turned on its head, because like in our society, women are naturally more nurturing because we are the ones that rear children. It's like this false argument, and you could turn it the other way and have it be equally false,
right,
or true seeming.
Yeah, it seems like what Alderman's novel is suggesting here is that many of the ways that we tend to think generally about how differences between men and women these are just sort of little stories we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's simply this difference in power. It's a provocative idea, because the equivalent of what they're talking about in the frame is, there are historians who think about, there's like matriarchal societies, and there are often the ways that people write about things like that are like, oh, it would be different if women had power because women are like this and men are like this. And I think Alderman is like, is it like her work here, I think, encourages us to question, like, are we just projecting, are these just stories that we're telling based on like sexist assumptions? Isn't it, maybe it's just this difference, and this is where I respectfully would disagree with the way this is described, because I think I'm not sure I totally follow that there's only one way that power can manifest itself, that it's always going to be this like corrosive thing that leads into an oppressive patriarchy or matriarchy, and those will look the same.
Yeah.
I also feel like
down to the very religion, down to the stories, even just scribbled out and rewritten, just barely tweaked. Right.
And maybe we can't really imagine a different manifestation of power because we're so rooted in this, but I just feel like I don't know if I think that there's only one shape of power, right? I think that power could take, maybe there would be other shapes. And then I think like I find it really provocative and compelling, the idea of that gender differences are simply like who has more physical power. But I just feel like surely it's more complicated than that.
It's just I guess it's a little troubling to me to reduce gender differences to some feature of biology. Like that just automatically becomes problematic and just doesn't ring true to me. I guess she kind of touches a bit on, she gives some men this power in some weakened form, like Ryan, I think, is the character that Jocelyn, Margot's daughter, is romantically involved with. He has this skein himself, and I think that's a bit of a nod maybe to intersex individuals, maybe like kind of trans individuals, but I just wonder, I feel like once we start saying like gender is just a product of one's biological organs, it just gets to be a little bit reductive.
Right. And maybe it's sort of like it's rooted in that, and then culture and history then inevitably follow from that. Yeah. So, but that's the ultimate source as it's described in this particular thought experiment. And that is also where I think I just feel like gender is more complicated than that.
And again, I could almost get with her thesis, her idea that like power, if you flip the power structure, women of society sort of run by women would look exactly the same as a society run by men. Maybe over the course of, again, thousands of years, once these things are encoded in society and culture and not just biological, I think maybe I could see how this would develop eventually. I just think within the course of 10 years, and we're talking about people who suddenly develop this ability but were socialized their entire lives as women, or whatever it is their gender that they were. I just feel like that's a little bit harder to imagine.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's like, yeah, be interesting to have it's like over generations to revisit this. I wonder what the next stage, if there were to be a sequel to this.
Or if maybe the story had just taken its time a bit more, so that instead of this being one book that happens within 10 years, maybe it's like we see the very beginning, the introduction of this power. Things don't change quite as quickly. Now we've got the next book, 100 years later, what does it look like? 500 years, a few thousand years. Maybe it's 4 books, and it happens more gradually. Then it seems like, but again, maybe she probably just didn't want to. She had an idea. It was a thought experiment. She kind of sped up the tape a bit on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think probably by the time you get to the frame, then it does make sense that, like, well, of course, women are the more, like what you were just saying about the projecting like a rationale for the current power system back into roles we imagined we played long ago, and that those roles we might imagine differently had this happened. I think that was I think by the time of the frame, I think things would have shifted dramatically. Yeah.
It's weird to me how modern the frame feels. It feels like these are people emailing right now in 2016.
You know what I read? And I read that so what's the name? Neil.
Well, it's an anagram.
Right.
Of Naomi Alderman.
Right.
Neil Adam Allman or something, or.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And then it's notable that she's using her own name as the name of the.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting.
So we're supposed to imagine that the male author wrote this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, though, I haven't stopped thinking about this since I've been reading it.
Yeah. Well, it got under my skin a bit. I mean, I just remember thinking, well, first of all, it's just very uncomfortable to read about sexual violence in general. But then I think it's like you said, she's trying to desensitize us to these acts.
Resensitize us.
Resensitize us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, by making it the violence against men, it feels even more sort of extreme and perverse. And so we're meant to think, more critically about this happening to women,
which is a rampant and terrible problem all over the world. So yeah. But and then I don't know, but I do think it's really like I enjoy having my thoughts about gender and power challenged in the way that this book is challenging them. So I was like, I have like a knee jerk, like, no, that's not what women would do if we suddenly had all this power. And then you have to think, why do I think she's asking you, like, but why do you think that? Right. Because you have romanticized notions about what it is to be a woman based on your own life in a sexist system. And that's really interesting to think about, right? And so I value her work for forcing me to think about that. Right?
Yeah, and whether or not we believe that this would happen, that this is exactly how it would play out if women were to have power over men, whether we believe that or not, it's interesting to force us to see it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? To experience it sort of through the eyes of this man, really Tundi, I feel like is, again, our point of view, our moral center of the book. It's interesting to be forced to look at it. You know?
And parts of it really do feel like familiar. Like there is that one part, I think we were mentioning this, there's like an online forum. There's sort of like is the name.
That felt so real to me, the online forum.
Yes, the urban hateful, docs. Yeah. That's basically like she's right on the money.
Like 4chan, certain underbellies of Reddit and Twitter and places like this. Yes, absolutely. There would be these like men on there just saying hateful things and trying to organize violence against women. I think maybe what I would have imagined would happen if women were to get this power, there'd be a backlash, and we didn't see quite the level of backlash I think we would see in real life. Like I think there'd be, especially in certain parts of the world, there'd be like a very quick reaction to sort of quash this. You'd get sort of the gods in chains from the 5th season, how you've got these people who are immensely powerful but like put in chains by a systemic oppression, and you would get men immediately organizing very swiftly to try to contain the power. I
wonder if it would be because power through physical ability is one thing, but one of the ways that the patriarchy manifests itself is through economics and who has wealth. And so I just feel I would wonder if then like wealthy men would immediately just absorb, okay, well now we have these powerful women whom I will use to secure my own, like if patriarchy could in fact stretch to accommodate women with these physical abilities.
It's interesting you say wealth too, because there's a line in there, I think Margot says it, that she thinks in her mind the ability to hurt is a kind of wealth.
Oh yes, I wrote that line down too.
Yeah,
so sort of like the source of privilege.
Yeah,
the abundance of like, well, I could.
So her argument is actually maybe that it's a greater kind of wealth than actual wealth, than monetary wealth. It's like you're wealthier if you have the power to dominate.
Right, and I think like if there's going to be a cataclysm that's going to reduce the world to rubble, and then having wealth, if you have that type of huge world-changing event, then your wealth is going to evaporate in a puff of smoke with all the computers failing and whatever. I don't know if that, I can't remember if that happens. But
maybe that's the point. Yeah. That's what Allie kind of says. That's what the voice in Allie's head says too. It's like, you can't get there from here. Raise it to the ground.
Right, yeah.
They have these power structures in place. They all need to be rooted out.
Right.
Raised to rubble and rebuilt. Hey everybody, Elle here, interrupting our conversation briefly to bring you to the Observation Deck. This is a place where our patrons can send in their thoughts and we might feature them here. This month's observation comes from Jody F. What the power really undercuts is the simplistic idea that the problem with the world is men have power, and the solution is women should have it instead. Alderman doesn't write it as a moral fable, where flipping the hierarchy automatically produces justice. She writes it as a stress test of power itself. It's not saying women are worse or women are better. It's saying power corrupts absolutely, no matter who wields it.
We did watch, there's a television show that is adapted from this, so we watched a few episodes from. Yeah.
First 2 episodes. I didn't get a chance to watch the rest, but...
No, not yet, but...
I love Toni Collette.
Yes, Toni Collette.
Anything that she's in is worth watching, in my mind.
Yeah, it's here at Elle Cordova, the Elle Cordova Cinematic Universe, since you don't like industries. We are big fans of Jodie Foster, but then also of Toni Collette.
Yes.
So
Jodie Foster is not in this show, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately. Oh man, if she were though.
No.
So Toni Collette is in it, and it's on Amazon Prime. It was an interesting.
I think it was canceled, unfortunately. I think there were going to be multiple seasons because they didn't get through.
They didn't get through?
As far as I understand it, there were multiple seasons planned, and I think it was only one that ended up being made. Yeah,
well, that's kind of the nature of these things, but it was interesting to see that, like, it's the different perspectives in the characters, and there's sort of a global nature to this story that I think that the television show really enhanced with, like, you know, this is very Alderman's writing is like thrilling. It's a page turner. It's really exciting. So it's like there's a cinematic nature to this that really, I think, transferred well into the television show.
We didn't get to see very much of it, but my understanding, at least from the first couple of episodes, it seems like the show is taking its time a little bit more.
Right.
Which is, you know, it's a decent sized book, you know, and but I do feel like there's so much there that it almost feels we're kind of rushing through it a bit. Again, I almost would have said the story could have taken place over a few books.
Right.
And the show does seem to be taking its time a little bit more. It's showing some backstories and actually adding a few details I noticed here and there.
Fleshing out certainly the relationship between Margot and her husband, which is just a small part of the novel. And then it, like, because you keep jumping ahead by years, like their relationship is like fallen apart, and we just get a little bit more of a well-rounded picture of things. You have more space. So yeah, it was interesting to see it.
Yeah, when it's the first thing I noticed when I picked up this book was the electrifying quote by Margaret Atwood.
Right.
And anytime Margaret Atwood signs off on something, I think you mentioned that she was kind of her mentor.
Yeah, I think that was in the acknowledgments that and I think it's very it's I can see you can see like The Handmaid's Tale is like obviously she's exploring something very different, but there's ideas about gender and sort of the imagining different social structures. I think we can see some parallels between some of Margaret Atwood's fiction and this novel.
Yeah, Alderman, I think, mentions that Atwood specifically recommended the introduction of the convent sequence.
Oh, really?
She
That's cool.
specifically said you should put them in a convent.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting, tension there.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of my favorite sequences in the novel.
Oh, yeah. Me too. When those in the like kind of more optimistic first part of it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I mean, Atwood, it's hard to compare anyone to her. She's in her own league, I think, in terms of like building this kind of world, this oppressive regime, and she has a very literary, elevated writing style. So anytime she gets involved with somebody or signs off on something, I'm interested immediately to see what it is.
Right. And Alderman, of course, I think probably her other most famous book is Disobedience, which is adapted into a film as well. I haven't read it, but I've seen
I've heard good things
film.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody who is not only writing science fiction, but also somebody who's doing other genres
Which
as
is,
well.
Disobedience is a queer story. I did notice the distinct lack of queer characters. And if you're going to, write a story that deals with gender and, these kinds of things, it's a weird absence in a way to like not have really any trans people or non-binary people or queer people. And I think there's maybe some backlash or criticism from, online about that.
Oh, interesting.
Just the lack of that. Clearly she's not afraid of telling queer stories. There's a distinct lack of queer characters here. But again, I think that comes back to like the question of, if you're going to do a thought experiment, the more variables you introduce, the more your the experiment gets muddled and kind of crumbles. So
yeah, maybe it would be interesting because we see echoes of with the convent scene, we see like references to like how women have maybe been able to gain some foothold in powers in the church, and we see references to that. It would have been interesting to see, like, famously in feminist circles there are people who have been sort of like separatists, like let's just be with ourselves, let's have just queer women's spaces and not engage with men at all. And that would have been interesting to see Alderman's version of that in the novel. But I guess I think it's like, like you were saying, maybe it's like a lot of variables and only so much space. And
she's already she's trying to show a few different places in the world and a few different power structures. It's like, at a certain point, it's almost too much for one story.
Right.
She is trying to cram a lot into less than 400 pages. So, yeah. I mean, I understand. Just something I wanted to mention because I've noticed other people have kind of brought that up.
No, I think that's a fair thing to mention.
But yeah, overall, very provocative book. I think this is one of the only books we've read in this club where neither of us had read the book before. The 5th season was another one.
Oh yeah, and iRobot actually, our first one.
The very first one, right. So always fun to experience something completely new. And I didn't know really anything about it going into it.
I went into it complete blank slate.
Me too.
I didn't want to know anything.
Didn't want to read anyone's opinions or reviews. Formed my own, and again was met with some interesting ideas that challenged my own thoughts about gender and power. But I think in the end, that's sort of the project of science fiction and this book club, is to go along with people's thought experiments, see what we can learn from them. Right.
And in imagining different worlds, then we see aspects of our own more clearly. And I think this novel really makes us do that in a very productive way.
Totally. So enjoyed. The poll on Patreon for the next month's book is, I think, currently live. So if you're a member on Patreon, go cast your vote, and look forward to reading another book with you next month.
See you then.
All right, see you then.